Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're joining us from. Today, we have an amazing panel and an amazing topic, a very interesting topic, dear to my heart as well. It's something that I find very interesting. It's about disinformation, misinformation. We're also going to talk about the difference between those two. But what I really find interesting is that how quickly we moved from the age of information to the age of misinformation. That's crazy. And that we're at a point of time that AI and all this generative AI can almost rewrite history. We can take an image and we can implement something and flood the internet with that. So I'm actually scared that, will history, will we need to use clay tablets, honestly, to document recent events? Or, yeah, how will our kids in the future will know what really happened? So, with that said, we have a lot to talk about, but I'll let the panelists introduce themselves. So, ladies first.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Charity Wright. I'm a principal intelligence consultant at Recorded Future, and I've spent the last few years researching and writing about foreign malign influence operations, so disinformation and propaganda coming from other countries, but my area of specialization is China. Very nice to be here with you all.
Thank you. So I'll go in order what I see, at least on my screen. Rafi, you're next.
Hey, I'm Rafi, the VP at Cyabra, and we fight disinformation. And we do that by uncovering the accounts, real and fake, the narratives, and also the content, Gen AI content that is being spread mostly on social media. And we do that for governments. We work with governments around the world around elections and health disinformation, etc. And increasingly, we're working with large brands who are also experiencing brand disinformation attacks. And whether it's the security teams or the marketing teams, they're both trying to struggle and dealing with this growing challenge. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Eyal, you're next.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Eyal Benishti, founder and CEO of IronScales. IronScales is all about stopping advanced phishing email, business email compromise, vendor account compromise, all those kind of fake invoices and fake wire requests and all the fun stuff that people are getting in their email. Started about 10 years ago. My background is mostly technical. I was a security researcher, malware analyst, reverse engineer. So I have a lot of passion to social engineering, fraud, and all these kinds of things. I'm happy to be here.
Cool. Thank you. And last but not least, Andrew.
Hi there. So my name's Andrew Fox. I'm a research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. I served in the British Army for 16 years, did a couple of master's degrees whilst I was serving. And now one of my areas of research is disinformation, and I focus on the psychology of disinformation. So looking at why it works in the brain and how we can get around that.
Okay, so as you can see, guys, we have the best people to talk about this. So let's start with the first question. It's a little bit philosophical, but I think it will set the stage a little bit. So let's start with, what is truth? First of all, is it something absolute, or is it something personal, or is it something else? Because I often hear like, oh, this is my truth. So yeah, what's your take on, what's your definition for truth? Anyone wants to start with this, or I'll just hand the mic to someone?
I'll start.
Okay.
This weekend, I was spending some time with someone, and she said to me, facts can change, but truth does not. But I struggle with that because I argue that truth is subjective, and it really has a lot more to do with your worldview and your lens that you're looking at facts through. Whereas, facts, sometimes we find out more about a certain topic later, and we have to update that. Okay, we have more context around this particular fact. But if we have evidence of a particular thing happening, I think we can look at that evidence and examine that in a way, go, okay, this is what we know to be true at this point in time. But definitely interested in hearing what the other panelists have to think about this.
I would also add to that, you may have the facts, but not all the facts, right? So the question is how many facts you have, because maybe that missing piece of information will turn the narrative around if you have only part of the facts.
Exactly.
Yeah, Rafi, you sort of shared a few interesting things before that on that aspect. Do even facts matter?
Yeah, well, I mean, we might be coming at this from a slightly different perspective because Cyabra isn't a fact-checking tool. If anybody knows anyone who's in the fact-checking industry, please buy them a coffee because they're going to be really, really tired at the rate at which untruths or lies are coming out and being spread. But I would also kind of reframe it in this conversation when we're thinking about truths of, because we're thinking about it from the position of the malicious actors and how are they thinking about it, I don't think they care about truth or not. The way that they approach it, and I'm sure Andrew, who's so experienced in this field and is such an expert and does such a good job at educating us all through his social media channels, is that they are trying to look for the topics, whether it's truthful or not, that provoke the most emotion and the most outrage. And that could be one thing one week, and it could be another thing the next week. The mechanisms of how they do it, the fake accounts, the content, is it deepfakes, is it images? So I think the world of fact checking and truthfulness is challenging, but it's also evolved because whilst we're talking about it, the malicious actors who are increasingly disrupting the conversation are not thinking about it in that framework.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing from you, it's like we're so much focused on facts and truth, but what we should also look at is who's telling those facts and what their motives are, what their agendas are.
Yeah, and how effective are they in spreading that? I'll give an example. There's a technique that recently was uncovered called DIP, deceptive imagery persuasion. It's not something Cyabra came up with. Ryan Macbeth, who's a disinformation researcher, came up with it. And it's a really common example of when an image is used, so it's factual, it's truthful, but it's used in a completely different context. So an example of that is images from war zones that are then used to show Ukraine. And they're not from Ukraine. They're from from others. How do you define and dissect fact and truthfulness? The image is real. Maybe it hasn't even been doctored before we even get onto Gen AI techniques, etc. And how do we stop that? Maybe it's just an image, but it's just being recontextualized and used in a different way. But the key important thing here is the narrative. What narrative is being amplified in order to be able to spread? What's the motive behind that? And I think that's really important. And that's how we should think about it, as well as fact checking, as well as truth. That has an important part in the conversation.
Which sort of connects to what Charity said. Maybe the image is factual, but you just missed the part that it's not from that war zone. It's from a different war zone. So that missing information. So Andrew, Rafi said that you'll find this interesting. So yeah. Talk to us.
We can talk about emotion and we can talk about the amygdala in the brain at some point a little further down the line. I don't think it quite fits with truth, but I think one thing that does fit is truthful intention. I think that's really important as well. Now, Rafi spoke about the malign actors. I think we have to also consider the victims of this, who, when they are deceived by disinformation, believe what they're saying to be true. And I think it's very important to separate out the victims from the perpetrators on this one, because if somebody's genuinely duped by a piece of disinformation, then that's what disinformation is there to do. It's designed to dupe, and it's done very cleverly by very clever people and very clever campaigns. And so, truth, I think, needs to be split up between intent.
So you're saying that if somebody was convinced that this fact is factual and that's the truth, and now they're spreading it out, so basically they're not the malicious actor, they're the victim. So which makes things even more complicated now, because now we need to figure out, like, okay, they're spreading misinformation, but they're actually victims versus these are the people that initiated it.
Yeah, quite so. So if I persuaded you that this glass is an apple, and you went on telling everyone that it was an apple, and you were absolutely certain it was an apple, that's not your fault, because I'm the one that's tricked you. So we need to be just very careful to work out who we're actually targeting when we try and counter this stuff.
Gotcha.
I think that's a really important point to make. And sorry to interject, but
go ahead.
A few years ago, myself and my colleagues wrote a new framework for analyzing disinformation, and it's based off of the diamond model that we use for cyber intrusions. So the diamond model for influence operations takes a look at various pieces of the puzzle of a disinformation campaign. But instead of using the term adversary we started changing the term to influencer, because oftentimes these people that are spreading misinformation may not know that it's false, or they may not be, involved in the actual malign, aspect of the campaign. They're just kind of like my grandmother on Facebook, sharing things that she doesn't know are true or false. So that's why it's important to use these terms in the right way. Not everybody has a malign intent behind sharing it.
I hope we have some kind of solution later down when we speak about it, because this is just becoming more complicated, right? Because we spoke about motives. Now we understand that even people with motives, they are victims, right? And we can't even judge based on that only, that thing. So, Eyal, just to get these things going a little bit, when does disinformation sort of cross the line, in your opinion, and it becomes, it basically starts to cause harm, in your opinion?
So I believe that disinformation becomes harmful when it undermines trust, erodes decision-making, or compromise security, which is like a topic that is dear to my heart. For example, or for instance, a deep fake-based impersonation in phishing attacks that go from just being misleading to being actually harmful and manipulating users into taking some dangerous actions, of going to do stuff that they were not supposed to do because they genuinely believe, about the authenticity and validation of the person behind this message. So moving from, being misleading to being manipulative, this is where I believe it's becoming very, very harmful for everyone.
Yeah, and again, and from what I'm hearing is also, if I'm the victim of misinformation when I mean victim, like harm is caused to me, like I'm now taking action and I need to maybe share information with an attacker or anything like that, I don't care about the motive at that point. So I wonder if there is a way for me, and we'll dig into that a little bit later, because there are two aspects here that I'm hearing. One is just the life cycle. And that's the next question, if anybody wants to prepare with that. What is the life cycle of a misinformation campaign? How does it start, and how fast it sort of, spreads? But also as an individual, and that's something we'll talk a little bit later, what can we do to protect ourselves from just harm, regardless how it started? So anyone wants to sort of tackle the life cycle of a misinformation campaign? How does it start? And I'm just curious, like, where does it start? Who's starting it? Like, what are they trying to gain, and how fast usually from initiating to actual impact? Anyone?
I think it really depends on the platform, especially these days. Like, you see the rates of kind of disinformation propagating over the TikToks of the world, comparing to, like, the more traditional media.
But is it sort of like random? Like people are just like starting a prank, and is it on an individual basis, or is it like organized crime trying to do that? Like, how usually those campaigns start? Because there's a difference between like, hey, I'm just like doing a TikTok, a funny one, I thought this would be fun, and I posted and it spreads like wildfire, versus a malicious actor trying to gain something, and they're working hard and working with other actors to actually push this out.
I think we need to just clarify our terminology, and Mark Bolinski's put in the webinar chat, is it misinformation or disinformation? Yeah. And the key difference is intent, as he correctly identifies. So a disinformation campaign will have a deliberately malign intent to try and persuade a person or a group of people to act in a way that's more favorable to the originator of the disinformation. And disinformation thrives on the spreading of misinformation. So a malign actor will introduce misinformation into the information flow, and when it spreads by people who genuinely think they're spreading something true, then it's misinformation. They're spreading incorrect data unintentionally. So to disambiguate between the two, I think that's important.
Okay.
And then to build on Andrew, I think your question, Gabriel, is actually two questions. It's firstly, who is behind disinformation? Exactly. Bearing in mind that we've now established that the intent is not a positive one. And then what are the mechanisms, or how are those campaigns built? And the question of who is behind it, I often think is analogous because we get asked this the whole time, and I think it's quite analogous to who commits crime, right? You might have state-backed crime, you might have organized crime, you might have groups of people doing crime, you might have individuals, or you might have kind of opportunistic crime. Someone is walking past the car that's unlocked and it's got the keys in it, and they may decide to step inside. And I think that's a useful way of thinking about disinformation campaigns. The challenge is around any given topic or narrative or issue being discussed across social media, regardless of the platform, is that it's the you and me that is trying to engage in a conversation, but we are being attacked or we are being exposed to any number of disinformation campaigns. And in any one topic, there could be a number of different actors that are involved in it. The key element here is, in terms of the difference between where the analogy breaks down, is you can see who's committing crime. Whereas on social media platforms, the anonymity, the fake accounts, and the sophistication of fake accounts is often the driver where that is causing the spread, regardless of who's behind it. But we don't get to see that, or to the average eye, it's very difficult for us to discern, that, and it's becoming harder as well.
Yeah, and so you're saying look, don't try to look for the criminal in this case. It's just too hard, right? Like where the source is.
No, absolutely not. We should always be looking for the criminal.
Okay, so how do we get to the criminals of like those that started this campaign?
And so I suppose that leads on to the second part of your question, which is the framework of doing that and the way that we often think about it. And I think Charity is completely right to think about frameworks and thinking of what useful frameworks are from the security world. What's exciting about the disinformation, counter disinformation space that all of us are working in is it's an emerging and quite a new field. And it really feels like the MITRE attack frameworks of cybersecurity from 15, 20 years ago is kind of what we're starting to see, these varying different frameworks. But to go to your question, the framework, or one framework that is often useful to think about, is the ABC, right? How do malicious actors create their campaigns? It's ABC: accounts, behaviors, and content. So what are the accounts that they are trying to create? What are the fake accounts? What different types and different, is it a bot or is it a troll, an avatar, whatever it is? And then how are they going to behave? How are they wanting their online foot soldiers to behave now that they've created these fake accounts? What are the kind of behaviors? How do they want them interacting with each other? And how do they want them interacting with us? And then C is the content. What kind of content is being created? It could be text, it could be deepfakes, it could be, and the content and narratives that are being shared. So when we talk about deepfakes and how to identify that addresses C, but we also have to be aware that it doesn't necessarily address A. So by having the framework and understanding the different types of challenges, we can then apply the right types of solutions.
So it sounds like something expensive to do, right? Like you have to do a lot of parts. Like you said, you have to build those fake accounts. You have to build those maybe bots. You have to initiate. You have to create the content. So going back to that original question, like who's usually behind this? Is it more on, and also how often is this in the commercial space versus on the politicians and all of the, like, what do we see? Where do we see that more? And should we as individuals, or we as consumers or companies, should we be worried about this? If I have a company, should I be worried about something like that? Because it sounds like something expensive that needs to be targeted. This is not just like, let's just fish everyone and hopefully somebody takes the bait. This is targeted.
Well, I certainly have an opinion, but I think I'll open it up to the floor and hear others.
Anyone else here?
I think we at Recorded Future, we treat this topic much like we do cyber threats, and we use similar frameworks. I already mentioned the diamond model, which the center of the diamond model for influence operations is narrative. Just like Rafi was mentioning, the narrative really steers us towards attribution, because we can analyze what story or message are they trying to portray, who benefits from this campaign. And then we piece all the pieces together of what infrastructure are they using, who are their targets, what capabilities do they have. But we also use models like the kill chain to, evaluate each step of the phase of a disinformation campaign, and really looking at it at a perspective of how can we disrupt this campaign with interventions. And we can probably get into, how do we disrupt influence operations later on. But even for the corporate perspective, I have many of my clients are very large companies in North America. They're very concerned about disinformation impacting their brand. Their brand reputation is one of their top priorities. So oftentimes a disinformation campaign can come from a competitor hiring a third-party marketing or PR firm that acts as a disinformation agent. So being able to quickly understand what's going on in that campaign and disrupt it and protect that brand reputation is ultimately our goal.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, maybe just to kind of add on Rafi's kind of ABC, we call it the who's saying what, like, especially in email phishing and cybersecurity. So to his point, in our case, sometimes it's a little bit different because the content cannot always be validated. Like, we can understand intent, we can understand these type of things, but we focus more on the A and B, on the who in this case, which is where we're using a lot of AI to do anomaly detection. For example, hey, what do you think about the behavior of this account? Is this kind of, do we see any kind of patterns of signs of malicious behavior? And then we can go back to the account and kind of start collecting information about the account. Say, okay, we see we don't love the content, we suspect the behavior, and now we have some reasons to believe that the account is maybe not 1% genuine based on some other kind of open source intelligence that we can collect. So I really like this framework, and I really like to kind of show how AI can actually go and tackle each kind of the things in order to try and come back with hopefully one unique answer about the validity of the user and the content.
So what does the individual, again, because again, I'm thinking about everything you guys are saying, it's expensive to probably initiate it. It's also expensive to defense against it. So now I'm an individual, right? I'm browsing the internet, so much misinformation. I don't have the resources to start checking every piece of information. I don't have the time to do this. I'm just like, and I have so many biases from the get-go. What am I supposed to do?
It can stay that asymmetric. I think that today Gen AI and AI are being used in order to automatically go and create this type of thing. So we're having kind of misinformation, disinformation on steroids. I believe that users will need the same type of technology on their hand to do fact checking, although I know that fact checking is not an easy thing to do, but at least to give them something on their hand, like, a co-pilot, like, for the lack of better terms, in order to try to do at least some of the cross-referencing and at least bring a more kind of like, a better form of information that a user can consume, and then maybe make a more faster educated decision about this piece of content or piece of video that he was just consuming.
But if the world is like, if misinformation is spread out there and it's everywhere, and our AI models are being fed with misinformation, so now what? Like, how do I know that this AI tools will be able to detect, facts versus, lies? And like, it's an endless sort of loop.
I come at it from the human perspective. So I have no technological solution to offer you whatsoever, but what I can offer you is sort of knowledge about how your body and your mind are working when this stuff is coming your way. So a lot of disinformation campaigns are targeted at your emotional responses. And that's your first giveaway that you're looking at disinformation. If you find heavy emotional triggers in information that's coming your way, straight away, that should be a red flag. And that's really difficult because it requires quite a high emotional intelligence to work that out. And then also, a high emotional intelligence to actually regulate yourself when you see something that's emotionally stimulating. But the idea behind it is your amygdala gets activated, it floods you with stress hormones, and it suppresses your prefrontal cortex, which is where your rational thinking, your critical thinking happens in the brain. So it's trying to shut those analytical abilities down so that you're reacting on emotions. And then when someone's emotionally activated, it's very easy to attach a narrative, your chosen narrative, to that emotional response.
But
so
we're
it's
a biased machine.
recognizing that someone's trying to emotionally trigger you, and like, why am I seeing this? Why has the person who's put this on the internet wanted me to see this? And if you have that as a kind of golden question that you ask when you find yourself getting upset or angry or annoyed about something, then that's probably quite a good starter for 10.
Do you think, though, it's like you said at the beginning when you started, like you have to be very emotionally intelligent about this, because we're a bias machine, right? And even when we are presented with facts and they're shown in our face, we disregard them because it doesn't align with our beliefs.
Even worse, there's something called the backfire effect, where if I show you evidence that goes against something you believe to be true, you will double down on your original position. You won't just disregard it. You'll actually take the position even more strongly.
Yeah, which sort of, so what do we do? Going back to, like, I guess the solution will be sort of a mix, hopefully, between evolving emotionally, maybe at school, teaching this, how to, because this is something, these are tools that we need right now, because sort of, again, we moved, when I was young, I've learned how to access information, how to use Google, how, like, we learned that at school. Now we maybe need to go back and learn how to sort of distill and understand what is true versus not. So we have to have those skills, but we probably have to have some technology to help us with that. At least to tell us, hey, you're biased. Go ahead.
Sorry, I have a recommendation based on personal experience. And Andrew, I just want to say so much of what you just said is relatable. As a disinformation researcher, I'm very aware of my own bias, and having to kind of take that hat off and clear out that lens that I'm looking through and just see things in an unbiased way is very difficult. And I find myself, especially during an election year, feeling very triggered and emotional. And so for me personally, and this is not like corporate consulting recommendation, this is just as a human being, I have to remind myself what my priorities are for finding truth. What is most important in my life that I really need to focus on fact checking, because I cannot just fact check every little thing that I see in the news that feels wrong or is off or feels biased. Because then you start fighting a political battle against friends and family and your community, and it's impossible for one person to take that on. So for me, I have to go, okay, my priorities are 1, 2, and 3. These are the things that I really care about fact checking, and everything else I just kind of have to go, okay, this is not a priority in my life, so I'm not going to invest my emotions and my time into it. But from a professional perspective, I also do that. I analyze Chinese disinformation and malign influence, and how they're trying to spread their narratives around the world. So I have to stay focused on that and not get distracted by everything else. And it has helped me narrow down how much time and energy and emotion I'm putting into fact checking on a regular basis. But one last point, I think it's also very helpful when I speak at conferences on this topic to recommend looking at a media bias chart and identifying those sources that are less biased, less political, and more straightforward with their headlines, with factual information. Narrowing down your sources to factual sources is very helpful so that you don't get caught up in far right, far left, highly emotional, politicized news.
But the question, but the original, sorry to come, but the original question was, as individuals, what can we do, right? And so I don't think it'll be a surprise for anyone in the audience that myself, Charity, Eyal are probably going to suggest, yeah, you need tools, and we have tools, and we've developed tools. But on an individual level, that's really hard. It's not scalable. It's not sustainable for individuals to buy those tools or to use those tools on an individual basis. And I think I think most people would agree that there is a kind of distrust that's, trust is breaking down in terms of social media. And I think most people would think, okay, no one in this audience has come to this because they don't think disinformation exists, right? Everyone here is because they think disinformation exists. But when we are individually on social media, how many of us are thinking, oh, wait, at the moment, I'm being exposed to disinformation, being exposed or I'm being exposed to things as part of a wider disinformation campaign. And so I want to suggest in a positive way that we could harness a bit more distrust. And exactly to what Andrew said, use the bit of distrust to kind of fight those instincts of, wait a minute, I'm outraged by, or I'm provoked, or I'm triggered by what I've seen, so therefore I have to react. And I have a 12-year-old son who is soccer mad. Football for the English amongst us. And he is crazy about football. And in the last couple of years, every summer when the teams buy and sell players, he comes to me and he says, Dad, our team, we're buying Messi. We're buying, in fact, the best players in the world. I said, where did you read that? Oh, on social media, or someone sent it to me. And so over the last couple of years, we've gone through this process. Yeah, my son's not going to have tools, and I'm not going to train him up on Cyber either, because he doesn't really have the attention span to use it. But over the last couple of years, we've gone through this process of saying, okay, where have you read that? Firstly, is it believable? Do you think that that's really true? Who have you read that from? What kind of sources? Is it someone who's reliable? Where have they heard it from? So that kind of just instinct of questioning and distrust. It's become harder, by the way, because he's now showing me images of said player who's never going to sign for our team holding a shirt because someone's created it on using AI. So he's like, shit. So then we've had to go through it again and say, okay, well, have a look at the fingers, or does it come from a reliable source? So I think we could add some distrust as a general approach on an individual level, but in a kind of positive way. It's not the ultimate solution, but I think it's a start.
So sort of like distrust and verify?
Yeah, absolutely.
So here is another idea, and I want to hear about this from you guys. Do you think, you talked about multiple sources and understand sort of the landscape. So there's so much free information out there. Do you think if you subscribe and you pay for information, is that information more truthful than free information? That source, at least, is that source? Should I start paying for subscriptions because I will probably get better information there than on social media, which is totally false? Not totally, but a lot of false. Charity, you're doing with your head no. So do you want to start?
No, I think paying for certain news sources is just literally that. You're just paying for a news source. That news source can still be biased.
Gotcha.
There's many examples, and I won't call them out by name because I know there's many well-meaning journalists and reporters working at those places. But essentially, unless you are going to a source of vetted intelligence, official sources that are known to hire diverse groups of analysts to check each other's bias, that's different. But not everyday citizens don't have access to that type of information. Although, some of our companies put out great reports that are very good reports on disinformation and who's behind it, and provide facts and evidence for those campaigns. But as far as news sources, I wouldn't pay for a particular news source expecting it to be any less biased than another.
Gotcha. Anyone else?
No, I think you need to just develop your own framework. I think that's the key output for this. If that framework includes a tool that you managed to purchase, that's probably a better place to put your money. But I don't think it needs to. If you retain that skepticism, if you feel a strong emotional reaction, then triple check your source, try and cross-reference it and confirm it before you get really irate or wound up about something. And maintain that skepticism. Understand your own biases as well. If you lean politically one way or the other, then if someone's telling you something that agrees with what you already think, then maybe have a second level of suspicion when that comes up. But you have to sort of just maintain that healthy skepticism. And if you're going to pay for anything, pay for Rafi or AL or Charity, and they're the ones that can help you through it. But definitely not pay for news channels.
And there's great academic sources of information too that are free. Researchers.
So let me rephrase it a little bit, and let's see if your answer changes a little bit. Okay. Do you think people with more money have easier access to truth than people with less money? Will truth become something only for the rich in the future?
If it's related to technology and access to technology, then yes. I'm thinking of less privileged populations in the world and what access do they have to information. If I think it's a matter of access to sources and information, but even those that do have access to information sometimes are flooded with too much and too many sources and don't know where to go to find facts. So I don't know. That's a really good question. I've never thought of that before.
I think
I
there
think
are.
yeah, just a short one. In the era of AI and the cost of compute, I don't think it will be very, very expensive to put something good in front of people, even if they don't have a lot of money. So I don't think it will be for the rich only.
Okay.
I don't know the answer, but I heard recently something that really made me stop in my tracks. And it was talking, I know this might sound random, but bear with me. It was talking about the Salem witch trials, and how, we all know about the witch trials that were conducted and about what happened. But what I didn't know is about the community of Salem and who they were. And I found out recently that the community of Salem were amongst the most literate communities in the whole world at that time. The rate at which that group of people could read and could educate themselves and read was highest than nearly everyone else in the world. They were more well off and certainly more educated. And yet, one of the biggest, I don't know, let's call it a disinformation campaign about witches and what you have to do with them next was able to take hold. And I don't know the answer, but I think about that. And also as well, it depends what kind of lens you're thinking about. If you're looking at the whole of the world, excuse me, we know, I think some of the figures that I've seen is about 1/3 of Americans aged 18 to 29 go to TikTok for their news. Now, if you're talking about the rich world, 18 to 29-year-old Americans, comparatively to the rest of the world, are much wealthier. But yet that's their number one news source, which is a problem. So I'm not sure what the answer is, but those are just two things to bring to the conversation.
So maybe if you have less access to information, you have less opportunity to be manipulated.
Well,
That's another way.
I think for malicious actors, they are thinking about it of where the eyeballs are. So
Right.
I think the conversation is less about where should we put our eyeballs and where are the eyeballs and what are the TTPs, what are those techniques that are being used against those communities, and then how can we stop that?
So the more screen time you have, the more you're on social media, the more you are, on the internet, probably the more you need to educate yourself because you're at a higher risk.
Maybe you should have, to borrow Andrew's words, maybe you should have more skepticism the more time.
Gotcha. Okay, bringing this back to the corporate, we're gonna go back and forth a little bit. So the company was attacked using misinformation campaign. How do we stop this? So we detected it. We may even think we know who the source is. Maybe we're not sure. Unlike a cyber attack where we can just, sort of lock things down, what do you do with a brand, with a campaign that is hurting our brand? Like, what do we tell? Are we starting to tell people, no, it's not true? Like, what do we do? Anyone?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and address this one. So I have 10 very large enterprises in North America as clients, and we address this topic quite often, especially in relation to hacktivism, because hacktivism is on the rise right now, triggered by geopolitical events happening around the world. And oftentimes corporations are targets. Maybe their CEO took a stance on a certain political subject, or they send money or sponsor something that makes them a target. Oftentimes we have to really hone in on what disruptions can we make to this disinformation campaign. And quite often, like Andrew said, sometimes putting the truth out there doesn't necessarily change people's minds, because we are hardwired as humans. And I'm sure, Andrew, you can confirm or deny this, but as humans, we're hardwired to believe what we see and hear first and what we see and hear the most. So therefore, social media really is the ideal weapon to exploit that vulnerability of ours. So sometimes we have found through academics and research and studies that we can flag certain disinformation, and we can add context, because I heard a quote in a movie recently. It said, "The best lies are mostly truth." So if we clarify what part is truth versus lies, sometimes those interventions in social media can help slow down the spread and the dissemination of that malign narrative. But also companies can use their PR teams, and we can do takedowns if there's malicious websites or infrastructure that are somehow impacting our brand, our domain, our logos. We can use legal resources to get some of that taken down. Otherwise, I think it's really more of a positive PR campaign that's needed, not necessarily to counter what the negative was said or repeat the negative narrative, but to counter it with some positivity. But very open to hearing what everyone else thinks about that as well.
No, I think you're right. You can't really delete things from the internet. Once something was posted, it will be there forever. No matter how many takedowns or kind of legal kind of actions we will take, which kind of bring us back to the receiver end. We need to kind of make sure that we are putting our kind of stand and thoughts out there, and focus on the receiver ends, focus on people knowing how to read and do the cross-checking and all the stuff that we just talked about. Because unfortunately, impersonating to brands is very, very easy today. Creating highly convincing type of content using AI and deepfake technology is super, super easy and not costly. You don't need to be rich. There are even open sources to go in and do it for it. One thing we spoke, but we didn't spoke about it enough, in my opinion, is user awareness and education. How do we invest more and more and more in making sure that people, I don't know, maybe starting elementary school. I don't know what's the right age to start this age, because kids are starting very early, getting on their iPads and laptops and consuming kind of content and stuff like that. To start at a very early age to basically educate them and explain them, I think we are doing a pretty good job explaining them the risk of the internet in mostly the beginning of the days. There are new risks that are being introduced every day. So I think that education is it's going to be a big kind of area and focus for us moving forward.
I think Eyal has ticked onto the really interesting part about this whole discussion, is that what we're talking about is actually nothing new whatsoever, in terms of the way our brains work and the fact that people are going to try and lie to us. This is as old as time. The difference nowadays is the sheer scale of people's ability to lie to us, because the internet has facilitated an information flow that is unprecedented in human history. Never has so much information been so readily accessible to the average person on the street. And if you think about that in terms of the brain, it's really hard to manage, because you have 17,000 decisions roughly to make every single day as a human being. And not all of those can be conscious. You physically don't have time. So a lot of them are going to be automated. And the trick is to know which thought processes you need to automate and which ones you need to take conscious, deliberate, careful thought over, and deciding, and working out your own schema for how you decide which information needs careful thought and which information you can just scroll past. That's where I think the training needs to happen. And then you need to let people know when they decide to do that critical thinking, how do they do it and what do they do? So there's two stages to it. It's knowing what you have to look at and then knowing how to look at it once you've just made that decision.
So Andrew, if I want to learn about this and I want some tips, what are the, for beginners, right? I don't have time now to learn how to change myself and take a lot of time. Are there any practical tips that I can do tomorrow to sort of incorporate into my life in order to be able to be more skeptical? Anything that from a human behavior perspective I can change, or how do I get to a point where I change even?
It's knowing what to look for. And I think I've said it a couple of times, and I'm sorry to labor the point, but I really do think it's the most important one. And that is, beware the emotional triggers. It's all about emotion. When someone's trying to deceive you, if they can get you into an emotional state, they will deceive you more easily. And so if you do see something on the internet that shocks or upsets or makes you angry, kind of stop before you react. And that's really, really hard to do, especially if you're scrolling on social media and you're like, so-and-so politician said what? Bah, outrageous. It's natural instinct, especially if you already dislike that politician or whoever they may be, because that's pushing an open door in your brain. That's just your confirmation bias kicking in, and you get annoyed. So it's a good knowledge of kind of things like anchoring bias that Charity spoke about, where you latch onto the first idea that you came across and you don't like to change your mind from it. Understanding there's things like confirmation bias, where people are just going to tell you what you want to hear because it reinforces what you already think. So wearing emotions, and then it's just double checking and triple checking stuff. If you decide that this is important enough for you to care about, triple check it. Whereas if it's just some headline, cool, scroll past it. Indiana Pacers lost a game of basketball last night. Cool, I'm not going to get upset about it. I don't care. Maybe they won. I don't know. It doesn't matter to me. Whereas, if it's something that I really care about, say there's an issue that's really dear to my heart, a social issue that I care about, and then that gets me riled up, then if I think it's something that's important to me, then I'm going to check that information before I make a solid decision about it. And it's just habits. It's kind of a good kind of hygiene in your decision-making process and what you let yourself get upset about and not.
Yeah. I think it's, part of the problem is awareness in the sense of self-awareness, because a lot of the people think others are being lied to, but they have the truth. So when that's sort of your starting point, you're not aware that you need to protect yourself because you're 100% sure that all the information you have, you're not a victim of misinformation. So first of all, I would say to people like, misinformation is everywhere, right? So like, there's no chance you're not a victim of misinformation or disinformation. Like there's zero chance if you think you have all the truth. So it really comes down to, first of all, self-awareness, and then routines. Like what I do, I'll give a tip that I do like almost all the time. When I see something, I don't search that something in Google. I search that something and I add, for example, fraud, scam, words that sort of help me to find if this is, or misinformation. Anything in the Google search that I put in, I add those words: misinformation, disinformation, fraud, scam. I want to see if I'm being manipulated. So you have to sort of get into that habit. That's at least tips that I do. When I look for information, and don't look for it as it is and then read, I add to it all those attributes to see that other side that I usually won't see, because even Google is biased and it's giving me results that are based on my previous searches. Again, that's sort of something that I personally do.
I look forward to the day that everyone is as conscientious as Gabriel Friedlander. In the short term, if you're a brand, I think speed is a key element of this, because what might be spreading or taking hold as a narrative might be untruthful. But if you're a brand witnessing it go viral, if you're a publicly traded company and you're starting to see your share price or journalists calling you saying, well, I've read this on social media. Would you like, I'm about to print an article or about to publish an article. Would you like to write an article? Would you like to give comment on it? And you're not really sure what's happening, because these things can emerge so quickly and take hold so quickly. With brands that we're speaking to, there's a big challenge of they don't know what they don't even know, and in uncovering the A, B, and C of what we discuss. Okay, what's the narrative? What are they saying about you? But also who's saying that is incredibly important. It's incredibly important to uncover very, very quickly. We've had clients that have tried to respond to an online crisis by having their customer support teams reach out individually to each negative commenter on social media who's commenting on the brand's page. The challenge is we've come along after the event sometimes and we've said, well, actually, did you know 34% of all of those accounts that your team spent so many hours at such great resource to try and respond to and say, well, here's our statement. Actually, it's not quite true. I'd like to speak to you about it. Are they fake accounts? So they're wasting time actually speaking to bots. You're not going to change the minds of bots whose intention might be there in the first place with bad intent. And so for that brand, that strategy didn't really work, or there was a lot of wasted hours and wasted. So uncovering exactly, okay, what are the accounts, not just the number of accounts, but what are the accounts that are actually causing the most harm? Maybe there are the super spreaders, and you can actually focus your time, either it's takedowns or it's addressing it. But even more so, in order to stop it catching fire and becoming a much bigger issue, to be able to have the context and understanding of what exactly is going on. We've seen some companies that, and I suppose, following on from what Andrew said about the emotion aspect of it, some brands have the opinion, well, if we don't get involved in any topics that could be emotional, right? So we've seen brands pull back from campaigns that maybe have talked about more DEI issues. And I think a lot of brands are thinking, well, if we just don't get involved, if we don't just say it, if we say nothing controversial, then we'll get away with it. It'll be absolutely fine. We'll keep our head below the parapet. The problem is we've seen bot networks that have been created for elections, the other side of the world, who, as part of their hashtag hijacking techniques, or as part of their attempts to fool the social media platforms that they're in fact authentic accounts, they are latching on to the discussion. And if a discussion is about your brand, especially if it's not positive, then all of a sudden you're going to see your brand go viral, and truth doesn't really matter. And keeping your head quiet, keeping your head below the parapet is also not going to really matter, because you just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And you're going to be even more confused, because when you look at the conversation, a big portion of that conversation is going to be accounts that are talking about the Indian elections, for example. So uncovering the various elements, the narratives, but also the accounts in a very fast time won't necessarily give you that one pill that gives you the answer, but it will certainly allow you to make the decisions that will then either communicate your position or communicate what's actually going on, or respond to the journalists, or take down websites, or try and take down the super spreader accounts. There's a number of different techniques and tactics that you can approach. But first, you really have to be able to conduct that comprehensive CT scan in record time.
Who is responsible in the company for this? Like, is it the security team? It's the PR. Who's the buyer? Like, it's such a big issue.
That's
Where
such
does
a good question. Wow.
Go ahead.
So it depends on the organization, and sometimes there is no one. Sometimes the security teams are looking at the marketing teams, because they're the ones that have the passwords and the budget for social, and the marketing teams are looking at the security team saying, hey, we increased the number of mentions about our brand by 3% last month, and the sentiment went up 4%. Great. And when the CEO comes knocking because his share price is going down of that company because there is something being discussed online, it kind of doesn't really matter who has the keys, who has the budget, and who has the mindset of threats. That's a really good question, and I think that will be the biggest change that we see over the next 12 to 18 months in the industry, as to who owns this, the tracking, who owns the monitoring, because as more companies are hit by it, they're going to start either passing it to one team or over another, or actually we might find a chief disinformation officer who's responsible for fighting this. Who knows?
Anyone else?
In my experience, it's the threat intelligence teams or the security personnel. And the reason is that we already have many, many years, sometimes decades of experience analyzing digital warfare. And so now this propaganda is, propagating through digital means. So we already know how to analyze the capabilities of certain threat actors, the infrastructure they're using, and identifying IP addresses, domains, social media accounts. So oftentimes, security teams ask me, why are they putting this on us? We've never analyzed disinformation before. And it really does require an extra skill set of understanding the psychology behind it, like what Andrew does. And so I think it's important to kind of teach and educate those teams to incorporate those psychological aspects of our human vulnerabilities, so we can understand both the technical vulnerability behind the campaign and the psychological, and counter it that way. But a lot of the threat intel teams at these big, huge corporations are the ones responsible for analyzing any disinformation that is impacting their brand, because they're also in charge of brand monitoring.
Okay, last question. I have a whole topic that I didn't touch, but at least I will touch it now with one question. That itself could probably be a whole webinar, but does this information leak into like AI and ChatGPT and all of those? Like, is it like beyond like, yeah, basically that's the question. Is it now entering all those data models? And if it is it permanent? How do we change it? And how do we validate their outputs? Anyone?
Outputs are being validated to a certain degree. I know that companies like OpenAI and others are using the reinforcement by human kind of method to kind of go over answer and help to fine tune. And they're doing like having a lot of scrutiny around the data they are feeding into their models, but nothing is perfect, obviously. And I think again, it's back to AI, obviously, but it seems like in the future we will have models to kind of look after models in order to make sure that the data that the models are using is data that is reliable, because all these things are happening in such a huge scale. And even when taking kind of, even we take data from different, and we talk about kind of cross-referencing and using more than one source in order to remove bias, I think that even that is not 100% kind of secure in terms of adding or contributing bias into our models. We haven't even started to talk about the alignment kind of problems that they're trying to deal with as well. So yeah, there are a lot of problems to deal with.
Yeah, and we have a lot of AI feeding other AIs with information. So people are using ChatGPT to write
Synthetic
stuff,
data.
and then you have other AI models being fed, but what ChatGPT wrote. So it's like, it's just the monster feeding itself. So again, but I won't open it up. I have a lot of questions around that. What I want to do, so each one of you is an expert in this area. So I would love the audience to hear sort of about what you guys are doing and what services you can offer to help mitigate this, because I think this is sort of part of, solving this problem, or not solving, addressing it to some degree. There is, the technology, the human part. So each one of you sort of covers a different aspect of that. So yeah, please feel free to talk about your company, your product, your services, so the audience will know. These are the different type of solutions out there to attempt to battle this huge topic. Anyone?
I can go first. Like, if you guys are worried about social engineering and AI and non-AI kind of generated phishing email, business email compromise, and all type of frauds that are landing in inboxes and luring people to do stuff that they're not supposed to do, or to give away information and stuff like that, we can help with that. We are fighting AI with AI. We have an adaptive AI platform that is very good in understanding of the real intent behind communication, with a very good understanding of communication partner and who's talking with whom, on what basis and what type of information they are normally kind of exchanging. So if your vendor was compromised, or if someone is impersonating one of the vendor or customers and stuff like that, we can help you to protect against that.
Yeah, so just to add a little bit, because I know you guys, right? We've been working for some years, but I've seen a lot of the scam today, a lot of the phishing emails. Sometimes they don't even involve a link anymore, right? People are communicating and the attack doesn't happen immediately. It's not an email with a link. It's back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So you really want to sort of listen to those conversations and pick up the sentiment and the style of communication in order to stop it in its tracks, because the phishing emails have become way more advanced than a single email with a link. So this is sort of what you guys are doing, and I think you're doing a great job. I'm just adding it because I know you guys. I wish I could do it for each one of you. I don't know, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so through my think tank that I work for, we do offer counter disinformation training. We look at the mechanics of it, we look at the psychology of it, and we offer some solutions as to how people might want to go about countering it. We've done a couple of tours of like university campuses helping students. So yeah, if anyone's interested in any of that training, then by all means.
Are there virtual, physical? What type of training is it? Like, is it for all the company? Is it for management?
Yeah, we can tailor it to anyone that wants it, whether it's senior management, or whether it's someone on the shop floor, or whether it's a university student, or whether it's a team who wants to learn how to do it so they can cascade the training themselves. So we can even do train the trainer.
Okay, cool, great. Who's next?
Ladies first, surely.
Oh, thank you. So at Recorded Future, we have over 15 years of experience putting together, research and analysis around how cyber threat actors work. Now we're applying that same skill, the same experience and tools to malign influence operations. And we have a team of over 100 researchers and analysts contributing to this work, checking each other's bias, being very thorough in not just investigating, but revealing to our clients, both companies and governments, about how these threat actors are working, what their objectives are, and how this is going to eventually impact your organization. So then we give not just the educational piece, but an understanding of a holistic campaign and how to defend against it.
That sounds really cool. I would love to one day see how this works. This sounds really, really cool. Rafi.
So I think webinars like these are fantastic because a big part of what we do is educating and thinking about the frameworks and thinking about the way that malicious actors work. As I mentioned before, I would say when it comes to private companies, governments are fully aware of this challenge and they have the tools and they have been using the tools. Cyber has worked with 19 different democracies over the last 12 months purely on helping them monitor and safeguard elections. When it comes to brands, as I mentioned, there's a big they don't know what they don't even know challenge, which makes it really, really hard for those companies to even start to address and understand the challenge. So I suppose this is just an open invitation. If people want to understand a little bit more about their brand or the risks that might be associated with their brand online, we'd be happy to look into it, right? We'd be happy to run a search and use our platform to be able to try and shine another light on a dark corner of the internet, which is part of our mission, because our mission is to fight disinformation.
So
And
basically, you're saying there are
Gabriel,
probably
I can do what you did with AL, and I can vouch for Cyber because I've done some work with Rapid before, and the outputs are absolutely fantastic. So I can heartily recommend.
So if you're unsure if you have somebody spreading misinformation about you, it's better to find it sooner than later. That's sort of what you're saying, Rafi?
I would guess, I don't want to put words in anyone in the
Okay.
audience's mouth, but I would guess that most people are here because they think something's going on, right? Or they've seen enough examples, or they're coming across accounts that are either real or kind of look a bit fishy, look a bit fake, but they're not really able to put the pieces together. I sometimes think that the fighting disinformation, I think it's an exciting time for this industry, and there are fantastic tools and solutions that are out there, but it's really an emerging industry. And if you think of like a Persian rug, right, where from the top of it, you see this beautiful design and you can see exactly what's going on. But if you're looking from underneath, you kind of see not really, but the more things you pull, the more threads you pull, the better idea you have of what the picture is on the top. The picture on the top is how disinformation campaigns are going to be run. And we're never going to see that full picture unless you are working in the disinformation campaigns for a state actor or for a criminal organization, whoever it is. But the more threads that we can pull, and so all of these tools are fantastic, all of these features are fantastic. But if you want to pull more threads to follow up that hunch of what you're seeing online, then we'd be happy to use the Cyber platform to see what we can uncover.
I would say it's just like in cybersecurity. The earlier you detect it, the better chance you have to mitigate it, right? It comes down to incident and response. Like, do you have an incident response plan? And this is a question that the audience I think needs to think about. Do you have an incident and response plans for disinformation campaigns? And it's a different incident and response if you do it earlier than later. It's a whole different ball game.
The analogy is perfect. The only difference is, or where it gets even more challenge, is the CEO is never going to knock on your door and say, hey, I can see in our systems that we're being phished or hacked.
Yeah.
The CEO will knock on your door when they start to see your brand going viral for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
And you need to have the answers to it. Saying we're looking into it or that we're going to have a response in a couple of weeks' time is not good enough. So that is I completely agree. Plus the added pressure of the CEO angrily knocking on your door.
If you do it sooner, then the stock price may not go down. Let's say it that way. Once the CEO comes to you, then it's sort of like ransomware. That's it. Like the stock price went down, and now like you're going to work really hard to recover from that. Probably it can take even sometimes years. So yeah, sooner is better. And I think for the audience, I think everyone, whether using the products that we mentioned here or the services, the idea behind this webinar is start thinking about it seriously, right? Like it's something that add to the toolbox that you have. It's something that you need to consider. It's happening, and be ahead of it, you know, even if it's just awareness, even if it's just education, if it's some kind of technology, whatever it is, whether you like it or not, it's hitting all of us. So we have to think about it. Anyways, guys, thank you very much. It was really interesting. I enjoyed it. It's something that I could have probably continued for another hour. I have so many other questions, but I think it was a good intro to this space. And I really appreciate the time that you spent with us here, gave us.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for
Thank you so
having us on.
much.
Bye-bye.